In 1506, war clouds were gathering over Italy. The Vatican and Florence were locked in a battle over an artist. This was no ordinary artist, but a tempestuous genius by the name of Michelangelo. The epic struggle that followed would result in one of the most extraordinary works of art the world would ever see. One worthy of a man who saw himself as no less than God's own artist. By the age of 30, Michelangelo had a reputation as one of the most brilliant artists alive, and one of the most difficult. He had made his name with a sublime sculpture of the Virgin Mary and Christ, the Pietà, and with his giant statue of David, which was to become the most famous statue in the world. But he wanted more than just fame in his own lifetime. He wanted it for eternity. Michelangelo created his own legend, the story of a divinely inspired, impoverished artist. In old age, he told his biographer, Ascanio Condivi,
"I've always lived like a poor man, eating sparingly, drinking almost nothing, and sleeping little. I have devoted myself to the beautiful ideas which spring from a divine spirit."
In this film, we search for the truth behind Michelangelo's story. Modern artists will put his genius to the test by trying to recreate the most famous scene from one of the artistic wonders of the world, his painting of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And we will reveal just how far Michelangelo was willing to go to become the greatest and the richest artist in history. Michelangelo's troubles had begun in 1505, when Pope Julius II offered him the opportunity of a lifetime to sculpt his tomb. Michelangelo had planned an enormous marble edifice covered with 40 statues. But then suddenly the Pope had cancelled the commission. Michelangelo stormed out of the Vatican with 5 papal henchmen in pursuit. The artist had a guilty secret. He'd already embezzled most of the money the Pope had paid in advance for the tomb and bought himself a farm.
Stop! Now listen, we're on Florentine territory, so you can't touch me and you know it. Now you go back to Rome and you tell your Pope that if he wants me back, he pays me for the tomb and we make the tomb, right? Now get out of my way!
Michelangelo returned safely to his hometown of Florence. The Pope was determined to make the government there send him back.
Michelangelo, the sculptor, who left us without reason and in a fit of petulance, is afraid, we are told, of returning. Though we are not angry with him, knowing the moods of such men of genius. In order that we may lay aside all anxiety, we rely upon your loyalty to convince him that when he returns, he shall be unharmed.
Julius II was the only equal that Michelangelo had in his lifetime, I think, in many respects. This monster prince, a battling fellow, an extremely tough fellow indeed.
It was rather unusual for a pope to actually get on a horse and lead his armies into battle, but apparently this is exactly what was Julius's character, and he was known as the warrior pope because he literally went out to reconquer the papal lands for the papacy and reestablish the authority of the pope in a very physical and important way.
The government in Florence was desperate to avert war with the Vatican. They pleaded with Michelangelo to go back to work for the Pope. Back in Rome, the Pope offered Michelangelo a job. Not the job he wanted, sculpting the tomb, but painting a ceiling. The ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, the very heart of Christendom. 20 meters off the ground, it was the size of a football pitch. Michelangelo was beside himself with rage. He blamed his enemy, the Pope's architect, Bramante.
It was Bramante. As always, Bramante. He convinced the Pope that I should paint the vault of the Sistine Chapel. It was purely malicious.
He was bamboozled into doing it largely by Bramante, by suggesting that he painted the Sistine ceiling, and by painting the Sistine ceiling, he was going to make a muck of it. And he was going to fall from grace from the Pope, and that would be the end of it.
He thought I couldn't paint. He thought that my work would be inferior to that of his charming protégé, Raphael. He wanted me to fail. He wanted to shame me.
I think he had rivalries with practically every one of his contemporaries. But I think this is a naturally A-type character that we're seeing in Michelangelo, that he was naturally rivalrous and essentially dismissive of anybody else who didn't achieve the same level of accomplishment that he himself did.
Michelangelo, the perfectionist, was afraid he would not be able to meet his own high standards when he painted the ceiling. He was convinced he was not the man for the job. He was a sculptor.
I'm constantly worn out. Haven't even got room to sleep.
I am not a painter. Painting is for women and mediocrities like Raphael.
But sculpture and painting are as different from each other as the sun is from the moon. I long to touch marble again, to feel the weight of a chisel in my hand. If I walk away again, there's no chance I will escape the wrath of His Holiness.
His Holiness. He'll have me killed first and offer me penitence afterwards.
As he began painting, he fully understood how ill-equipped he was to the undertaking. He sent for assistance from Florence. He wrote to friends asking to be reminded of some of the techniques of fresco painting. It is a simply unbelievable challenge.
Michelangelo despaired at the task ahead. As a teenage apprentice in an artist's workshop, he had been trained in fresco. But that was 20 years ago, and he hadn't done any since. He knew fresco was the toughest of all arts. It required painting quickly onto damp plaster. Painting the ceiling was to become the greatest odyssey in the history of art. Now, 500 years later, artist Leo Stevenson is about to follow in Michelangelo's footsteps. Like Michelangelo, he has done virtually no fresco. But working with him is Fleur Kelly, an experienced fresco artist. They've come to St. Joseph's Church in East London to meet Father Dennis Hall. Here, they'll attempt to paint the iconic scene from the Sistine Chapel, where God creates Adam.
This is a fabulous image. It's so famous, it's almost invisible. I mean, those hands, you know, it's just absolutely extraordinary because that's like the smile on the Mona Lisa. That's the most famous bit of the whole work.
Within the cliché is, in fact, the most wonderful, wonderful painting.
Mm-hmm. It has such a powerful meaning for the whole world, and to actually have it in the context of this church with the other paintings that we have is going to be a tremendous source of, I think, spiritual strength for people.
St. Joseph's is a busy East End church. Masses will continue throughout the painting of the ceiling. An inventive scaffolding design is needed to allow the artist to work without disturbing the congregation. This is the same problem Michelangelo encountered. He too needed specialist scaffolding at the Sistine Chapel in 1508. The job of designing it fell initially to his rival, Bramante.
The Vatican architect, Bramante, came up with this ingenious scheme of drilling holes in the vault from which he'd suspend ropes to hold the scaffolding. So I said to him, Bramante, that is a brilliant idea. You are a genius. Just one question. What happens when we take the scaffolding down? Great big holes in the painting. Oh, don't worry about that, he said. We'll sort that out later. Perhaps he thinks I'm going to sprout wings or something, I don't know.
It was Michelangelo himself who came up with the solution. His ingenious idea was to brace the scaffolding between the walls. Leo consults engineer Nick McLean about doing the same at St. Joseph's.
There's an amazing sketch by Michelangelo that he did where it shows him in a kind of a stepped sort of structure, and we can't have any supports directly underneath us because that's not what he did. Now, what I want you to do is to work out a design based on that. That's not going to break my neck because I'm very scared of heights. Sounds silly, but...
No, it's not silly. He would have started by saying, OK, there is the shape. It's curving. I need to be a certain distance from that.
Yeah.
And so the steps that he has drawn here are natural follow-on from that requirement.
Yeah.
And then we know that we cannot have supports down to the ground because this thing is going to be in place a very long time and the church has to function. And it leads automatically to our truss design and, in engineering terms, leads naturally to the shape.
And it's all going to be very strong.
It's all going to be very strong, and it's also going to be quite stiff, so that as you're trying to make your delicate little paintbrush strokes, it doesn't keep swaying underneath you.
I feel Michelangelo's abilities as an engineer have altogether been underestimated. He was the doer. Leonardo da Vinci was the ingenious thinker, imaginer, but Michelangelo was a person who actually accomplished and carried them out. And the scaffolding is just one indication of Michelangelo's true interest in engineering problems and his ability to solve them in the most logical and practical way.
1, 2, 3.
It's pretty solid to me.
The time has arrived for Leo and Fleur to see the scaffolding for the first time.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
Well done.
Extraordinary.
Now they can begin the daunting task of painting the fresco. They will use the same techniques and materials as Michelangelo and will work at the same rate. This gives them only a week to complete the scene.
It was a huge undertaking. Ordering and mixing the paints, slaking the lime, preparing the plaster, deciding on the content of the paintings, executing the drawings, transferring the drawings to the ceiling. Huge. And I did it all myself.